So now we're moving on to something even more interesting. I'll give you a sneak preview. That was tax. In order to pay tax, you've got to make some money. In order to make money, you have to have a business. In an ideal world, you should invent the perfect product. What is the perfect product? Well, it should appeal to all ages, from age 8 to 80. It should appeal to both sexes, ideally. It should be pretty cheap, but on the other hand, it might be quite high-end as well. So in an ideal world, it's a staple, but it could also be used as a luxury. And it would come, therefore, because it's got to appeal to everybody, it's got to perform all these functions, it should come in all shapes and sizes and colours, so that it's always adaptable to the current market. Now, you might say that's the perfect product, but it's impossible to create. You would be wrong, because our next speaker invented exactly that, the perfect product at her kitchen table, with a bit of help from her mum and £600 in her savings account. Today, her business turns over £10 million a year. She sells satchels, like these. She sells them into 100 countries around the world. She's the perfect example, if you think about it, of the successful business entrepreneur. So much so that she was asked by the government, as James Collins was telling us earlier, to explore how to make it easier for other people to follow in her footsteps. And the result was published a few weeks ago. It's the Self-Employment Review. And here to tell us about it is the woman herself, the founder of the Cambridge Satchel Company, a wonderfully successful bag lady, Julie Deane.
Hello. I'm really pleased to be here, actually, because although now I've got this terribly corporate CEO title, I'm actually a founder, so I consider myself self-employed. There's no group I'd rather be a part of, because the self-employed sort themselves out. And this was really borne out when I was doing my review. When I was talking to people, they weren't a whiny bunch. They weren't a bunch asking for things that other people didn't have. They didn't feel entitled. They just wanted a fair go, and they wanted to be recognised. And so it was really my honour to be able to be a voice, quite an insistent voice, and hopefully quite a clear voice, so that I could put across what would make a difference to such a diverse group. Okay, so I've been told the clicker doesn't work, but if I click it, somebody gets a red button, and they'll know we're ready to move on. We're not ready to move on, so don't freak yet. Okie dokie. So I did the review over 6 months as a measure of how important I thought that this could be. This was 6 months leading up to the busiest trading period for my company. So, I didn't sort of do it lightly. It was nationwide. We had over 900 people speaking to us directly through the information gathering exercise. We also spoke to all of the large membership bodies, the professional bodies, IPSE, of course, the Institute of Directors, the Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. We tried to meet with representatives of as many bodies as we possibly could. We also engaged with the growth hubs, because they're having quite an impact across the country. So they're likely to be talking to people who want maybe slightly different things, because the landscape is really evolving. So I'm going to press it now. There we go. That was your cue. Yes, it worked. Well done. I think the diversity of the group is one of the things that really, really comes across. And this slide is my motivation. Everybody has their own motivation for being self-employed, because it's not the easy option, but it is the option that'll give you the flexibility to set your own goals and kind of go after them. This was my motivation, getting them out of a school that just was not performing. And I did put a lot of effort in. I was even chair of governors at that school to try and change it for everybody. But in the end, I just had to bite the bullet and say, well, if you're not going to move fast enough, I'll just move my kids somewhere else. That means school fees. That means starting a business. So, the review. What we were trying to do was to look at the self-employed, 4.6 million people, 15% of the workforce, and it's growing. Since 2008, over half of all of the new jobs are coming because of the self-employed. And so really, we are punching way above our weight in the creating of jobs and creating opportunities and exporting. So this is really, really important. Why do people start out in self-employment, and what are the difficulties that they find when they do start out? Are there things that are being missed that could just be clarified and simplified to make their job easier so that they can move forward even faster than they are? And then what are the problems in running and growing a business? So there were some really common themes, and that's was a huge relief to me, because when you're looking at a group that self-employed everybody now, because it's sexy to be an entrepreneur, and Dragon's Den's on the TV, and so that's what everybody thinks, you know, you're supposed to be doing. Mortgaging your house, getting a business model, and developing an exit plan. That's not ideal. But actually, the self-employed are all those really vital, important people. They're the teachers, they're the artists, they're the taxi drivers, they're the farmers. Such a diverse, fascinating, and brilliant group. But these are the themes that ran through the findings, and they came through incredibly strongly. So the importance of the group, obviously just by sheer numbers and the fact that we are creating the jobs, that makes us important. The motivation. Self-employment isn't something that you do just because you've lost your job and you have nothing else to do. Self-employment is a really positive decision. And usually people are going into it because they want freedom, flexibility, and independence. So they want to be captain of their own ship, and that's absolutely fantastic. The diversity I've spoken about already, evolution over the last 10 years, if you think, just the impact that technology's made and continues to make. So if I started my business about 7.5 years ago. If the internet had not been there, my children would never have made it out of that school, because it's quite a small village and I'd never have sold enough bags. But from my kitchen, I could reach everywhere, all over the world. And the interesting thing for me was that I never really thought it was exporting. You know, people were ordering from me, and they happened to live in Australia or Vietnam, China. That was the woman at the post office problem. You know, this is just my customer's got a different address. And so this hang-up that a lot of businesses are thinking, is it difficult to export? Am I ready to export? What market shall I choose? Just go for them, and you know, your customers will pop out of the places that are often right. And then the big one, equality and fairness. So, yeah, we're not looking for grants, we're not looking for handouts, we're not looking to be patronised, because we're absolutely fantastic and we can do this, but we do expect to be treated fairly. And so those are some of the recommendations, the key recommendations that came out of the report. Education. Lord Young has been banging on for ages that we're not doing a good enough job about preparing our young people to take on self-employment, but also to take on life. You know, when we're not teaching them to budget their money, to manage their household finances. We're not telling them what a mortgage is and what all of these different terms mean. So when they leave school, and often they see, oh, I could buy a computer interest-free, or with this loan, or should I just use cash? They're not being prepared, and so they're just getting let down. If 15% and growing are going into self-employment, they all need to be better prepared. Advice and support. There is so much advice out there, but a lot of people that I speak to that want to start their own businesses, I mean, you could spend all day looking at all these different sources of advice, and they're all very good, but can we please just have a central hub that's objective? And you can have, like Google, where they say this one's an advert, so, you know, take it with a pinch of salt, but these other ones are purely objective. Just one portal that's really clear, so we don't have to waste time faffing around, researching endlessly and putting off just getting on with it. There's a huge need for more flexible financial solutions, pensions and mortgages, because you don't know how much you can commit every month, because not every month is December, or now with Singles Day, November for me. So there are months that it's tough. And so if there were flexible things where you could just take a little bit of money back out and then put it back in later on, golly, that would just make it so much easier. Then there's the whole thing of maternity allowance and adoption allowance. These are things that are affordable. It centres around that first 6 weeks after somebody's had a baby or adopted a child. All the self-employed are asking, because they pay in taxes, they often pay in more taxes than people who are employed, and yet what happens to them in that first 6 weeks? They're treated completely differently, and that just clearly isn't fair. The lack of a legal definition as to what does self-employed mean? Because some people are calling themselves freelancers or founders, and then there's a whole other definition for tax purposes. You know, just sort it out, because things are getting more complicated in the way that people work, because people are taking great advantage of the flexibility that you can have now. And that's fantastic. We shouldn't be held back by a definition, because it's just madness. Impact assessments, every time the government is looking at new policies, they take a look at how this impacts different sectors of the population, except the self-employed. I mean, let's say that's an oversight, in which case it can just be put right. Overly complicated legislation and administration, that sort of speaks for itself. It does nobody any good, and the minute something becomes overly complicated, it also becomes really expensive and slow. Shared workspaces. I'm sort of banging a drum a bit on this one, because I'm a massive, massive fan of our libraries. And it really angers me to see library space closing, and then we stand around saying, oh, shall we create a work hub or something? These community spaces are there already, and they should be serving people in the community. The British Library does an incredible job of dealing with IP and giving advice on grants, on international agreements. If we just roll that out through the libraries, it will really give them that new breath that they need to become that vital part of the community, so that everybody can continue using them. Got on a bit of a rant on that one, sorry, take it back. And then the technology, looking at the technology, it's really enabled not just, it isn't just the tech kids down in Shoreditch, it isn't them, because actually self-employment, the people using the technology to get going, are typically the over 55s. You know, that's where you see a really big difference between the self-employed group and the employed group, because when you're your own boss, you're not going to discriminate against yourself. And then it was made very clear that taxation was not part of my review. My review, the scope was already very, very wide. However, I could not report back without saying that a taxation review for the self-employed is really long overdue. You know, we cannot spend our time doing reports that we think is right. We're trying to do the right thing. It needs simplification, and that really needs to be addressed. So, what's next? I spent a long time on this. I spoke to so many people. It's a good report. It's written in plain English so that it can be usable. It's practical, and the recommendations are absolutely 100% adoptable. And so my job is to keep it on the agenda, to try and get as many of these recommendations adopted as I possibly can, and to make sure that nobody thinks that I did this as some kind of like weird vanity exercise and then I'm just going to pop off onto a next project, because this review can make a difference, and we just need to keep getting heard. So if you want to read the review and you haven't, you'll find it at bizgov.uk, or you can just Google it because you're resourceful enough for that. You can definitely find this review. So thank you so much for asking me along. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm just going to get another chair put in for you here. Julie, if you'd sit on that chair for our panel. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure you've got plenty of questions for Julie, but let me introduce the rest of the Question Time panel to join us on stage. Doug Henderson, Hannah Bardell and Glen. If you could come and sit in that order from the right. Doug over on the far right. Doug is a former MP for Newcastle North, Labour. He's a former Minister for Europe and for Defence. Hannah's in the middle, that's it. Boy, girl, boy, girl. Hannah is the SNP MP for Livingston and the SNP Shadow Spokesman in Westminster for Business, Innovation and Skills. Before that, she ran Alex Salmon's constituency office, brave girl. And before that, she worked in communications and marketing in the oil and gas industry in Scotland. Glen is the Conservative MP for Salisbury and is PPS, Parliamentary Private Secretary, in Sajid Javid's, the Secretary of State for Business, Innovation and Skills. He also sits on the Select Committee for Work and Pensions and has experience in defence, communities and local government, and constitutional reform. Before we kick off, let's just see a short video about the nature of self-employment. Again, you've been hearing lots of figures this morning. I think you'll find this sums up the contribution that we make to the economy. Impressive stuff. Let's start this session then by making the point that Julie's self-employment review was published on Valentine's Day, and it's said to have been a love letter to freelancers. So I think our first question has to be to Glen, as PPS to Sajid Javid. It's a no-brainer. John, when are you going to implement this love letter for us?
Well, one of the things about being a PPS is that you're in a position where you hear lots of things, but you're not the decision maker. I do know that it was very well received, and I've spoken to Anna Subri and Sajid about it, and I think there are a number of elements that they can probably implement more quickly than others. But I can't give you the answer to that because actually I don't have the power. But I do think it was a very well calibrated and balanced review. And as someone who worked in this for this organisation during the last Parliament, I think it's got some practical recommendations that are beyond just tax as well. And I would be very hopeful that we would see a positive response at some time soon. But
so
sadly,
it's
I don't have
being
the
read.
power.
It's been read.
It's been well received.
Yes.
But we'll have to see in the next few weeks, in terms of the legislative agenda for the next session, what elements will be taken forward.
In the next few weeks?
Well, we have a new agenda
yes.
for government in next month. So, but I can't promise anything, and I'm not. It's above my pay grade, I'm afraid, Sue. So,
What is there anything that you really didn't like in it?
No, not really. I think that the thing is that we've got to accept that world of work's changing, as all those excellent films showed. 3 in 20 people are self-employed. People have different expectations of the workplace, and government needs to respond. I mean, on the Work and Pensions Select Committee, we were looking at the whole issue of pensions. And, I think that there has been a bit of a misunderstanding about self-employed being, a vehicle to, pay different levels of tax, which is wrong. There are actually lots of insecurities and risk-taking that the government needs to, take reasonable steps to underpin. And so I hope that particularly in the areas of the employment law and tax, that the government can grasp and nettle and really change the way it looks at self-employed.
Good to hear. I want to get into the detail of pensions and mortgages and so on in a minute, but let me just ask, first of all, Hannah Bardell and Doug Henderson, what do you feel are the priorities in this report? What do you think the government should really be focusing on, top line?
So much of it is so important. I think it is the first thing to say. For me, I think the maternity pay aspect, the adoption pay, and getting equality for people who want to have families, because so often they're having to make choices between one or the other, and the flexibility. The cutting red tape as well. So often when I talk to small businesses, you know, I have a small business owner in my family, my sister-in-law started her own photography company, and actually it meant, you know, when she went to return to work, she wasn't allowed to. She couldn't do the hours she wanted, and ended up, it actually enabled her to go and run her own business. But I think those key things, and the point about libraries, when I was looking at that, and I was thinking, I've been working in my own local community recently on how to revive some of the community spaces. The idea that we bring, and you know, we're not the best at it in Scotland. We've been doing a huge amount of work on entrepreneurship, on small businesses and investment, cutting business rates. But that idea that we bring community spaces together with skills agencies to make them a one-stop shop, I think is a fantastic idea, and it's certainly something that I want to take back to Scotland.
And Doug Henderson, I should say that Doug has stepped in at the last minute here. He's been very kind because we had a bit of a problem. It's not his speciality area, but I'm sure he's mugged up swiftly because that's what ministers are used to doing. Even ex-ministers.
I don't know any minister who ever performed in their speciality area. And I suppose, as I was only asked about 10 minutes ago to do this, I'll have to resist making policy on the hoof, though it doesn't seem to deter others in my party these days, I have to say. I think the most important thing is to recognise that the world of work has changed.
Yeah.
And if I think I started my working life in Rolls-Royce as a work-study guy. I used to check people. And in these days, everyone would be employed by a big company like Rolls-Royce. Whereas nowadays, there's every likelihood that someone who was looking at the production system in Rolls-Royce would be a contractor. And they would come in to look at a particular task to be undertaken over a particular time period. And that's replicated throughout industry and commerce. And the government has, I think, and this is not a party political point, governments of all kinds, including those in Scotland, have failed to recognise that there are these major changes taking place. Now, intellectually, they know it, but they're a bit wary, they're a bit timid, they're a bit frightened of actually facing up to the issues that Julie identified in her introduction. And that's where I think government have to motivate and inspire young people, people at school, people at universities, that there are other ways of working other than being a wage slave, as Marx used to call it. And people don't want to be wage slaves now. They want to have independence. They want to build their own lifestyles. They want to work on their own creativity. And I think we should be reinforcing that in every way that we can.
It is. It's a culture change, isn't it, is what we're saying. That you know, it's always been regarded as being self-employed or setting up on your own has been regarded as not quite a proper job. You know, something you do because you failed to do the other thing, which is, you know, get into a kind of regular full-time employment. And that's what's changing now. And that's really what we're all agreeing, I think. The government's agreeing. We've all... Yeah, go on.
Can I just say that one I think governments have not grasped and could do more about is this financial education and preparation for world of work. It seems to me that we've never really worked out how to do this. There was some steps forward in the last Parliament, but without it being compulsory in the curriculum, I'm not talking about, you know, just knowing how to fill in a tax return. I'm just talking about the awareness of the options of employment and, you know, how to save, all these sorts of skills that actually, and business skills that, you know, don't form high enough priority in curriculum. And I just think that that's something that the government needs to grasp. They put great emphasis on a core of academic performance, which I think is absolutely right. But I think in terms of character and life skills that allow people to have the option to confidently go into self-employment at an earlier stage is really, really
So teach them at school what a mortgage is and what a pension is and all those
in
other
more
things,
detail,
how to run a bank
and what
account,
compound interest is, so that savings might be more attractive.
and savings.
But it's about culture as well. I think we have lived in a culture, certainly when I went to university, where if you had the grades, you went to university, and going to university meant a job.
Yeah.
And the world has changed, and I believe strongly that we must have parity of esteem for apprenticeships, for vocational training, along with a degree, because the two are just as good as each other. And if we continue to live in a world where young people feel that they have to go to university, that they should go to university, I was privileged to go, and I know most of us here probably were, but there are so many different routes into the world of work now. And we in Scotland have changed our school system. The Curriculum for Excellence was started by the previous Lib Dem Labour administration. It was continued on by us. And it's about having flexibility in the education system so that teachers can work across different departments on entrepreneurship and bring together lots of different ideas and departments rather than working in silos.
I'm going to take a question from the floor from Caroline Morgan. Is Caroline Morgan here? Where is she? Here she is. Can we have a microphone down here, please? Caroline, your question. Tell us what you do first, if you would.
Hi, I'm Caroline Morgan and I'm a freelance project manager. Does the panel think that self-employment is a good option for mothers wanting to return to work? And if so, what more could be done to support this ambition?
Julie, I'm sure you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it's the ideal way of returning back to work because first of all, some of it is a confidence issue. You know, that you can be lulled into this feeling of, oh, if you don't take the minimum amount of time out and you don't hop back on that career ladder, your brain is going to decay and you're going to be a blob somewhere and it'll be awful. And that doesn't actually happen. I took 8 years to be at home. I was like a village busybody and did all kinds of things. But I think everybody was relieved when I started it. But it's ideal because you can be there, and if the children are small and if they're ill, nobody's inconvenienced.
It's a tough option, though, isn't it?
It
I
is.
mean, you know, you might set up in the corner of your bedroom and downstairs the child is screaming and you've got somebody kind of who's nipped in to help you out. But it's just, you know, you never quite
It is
concentrate.
juggling, but I think that women are really good at juggling. And I think that it's just that much easier if you can put your priorities and deal with things as they come up, because then people aren't afraid of lengthening their day. I don't know many self-employed that work 9 till 5.
No,
And
I'm
they'll
sure
just
that's right.
and they'll just reassess sort of where things are going to sit.
Fit it in. Let's talk about your idea for a small business commissioner. Chris Wilford, where are you? Here he is. Can we have a microphone to Chris? I think you've got a question about small business commissioner.
Yes, hello. Chris Wilford. I'm Head of Policy at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. We're the global professional body for alternative dispute resolution. As part of the...
Gosh.
With regards to the new Small Business Commissioner, do you think it has enough teeth to work for micro businesses?
Yeah.
Hannah Bardell, do you think... what qualities do you think the commissioner should have?
Well, I've just come back from a trip to Australia where I was actually there for a friend's wedding, but I took the opportunity, having sat on the Enterprise Bill Committee and gone through the process of hearing about the Small Business Commissioner that is allegedly based on the Australian model, to actually go and meet some of the commissioners. So I met the Commissioner of New South Wales, the former Commissioner of New South Wales, and the Commissioner of Victoria. And just briefly, the way that Australia structures it is they have a federal commissioner and then they have individual state commissioners who have a variety of different powers. So in the UK, you know, Australia has 24 million people. We've, 65 million in the UK. We have so it's not actually like for like. And I believe strongly, having come back and actually spoken to some of those commissioners, that Scotland and the other devolved administrations need their own commissioner, first of all. Second of all, I think it is partly about having more teeth, but I think it's also about culture. So what I found when I was there was that the individual, the person who takes on that role, is hugely important. That person has to be respected across the industry. They also have to have the trust of the legal profession. The legal profession have to be engaged, because in some respects you could, the arbitration part of it, the mediation part, could be seen to be taking away from the legal profession. But if a small business is looking to make a claim for £1,000 and it costs them £3,000 to go through court, it's a perverse system. So what has been created in Australia is an incredible culture of trust and, in some respects, fear that if a commissioner writes to a business and says, look, you need to come to mediation, quite often the chief executive of that company doesn't know that somewhere down the supply chain something's going wrong, and it is very often sorted out before it even gets to arbitration or mediation. So I think that we need to look very carefully at the individual having additional powers, because I know that the UK model is based on prompt payment, and I'm sure everybody would agree that that is important. But I am not convinced that one individual commissioner is going to serve all of the SMEs across the UK in the way that it does in Australia.
John Glen, is the Small Business Commissioner, who is proposed in the Enterprise Bill, it's going through and we're going to have one, is he predominantly there to sort out the late payment issue?
Well, it is one of the primary concerns that most small
Sure.
businesses
But
argued
is
for.
he going to do more
And-
than that?
Well, I think there are a lot of principles around, getting small businesses to see that they can resolve some of the issues around bureaucracy, around poor relationships through dialogue, through the intervention without going to law. And I think for many people who are running small businesses with 2 or 3 clients in one locality, the notion of falling out to the extent that you need to go to the law is not an option. So I do think it has. I met with the New South Wales Commissioner 2 or 3 years ago, informed why it went in the Conservative manifesto. And I think it is a massive step forward that many small businesses want. I do recognise that it is in the detail, it is in the application of how it actually works. And obviously, if it isn't working, the government will need to look at it. But I think as a first step for many small businesses, knowing that they've got somebody to go to who can actually, the threat of exposing systemic poor payment, actually finding ways of reducing the level of bureaucracy if you're dealing with one authority and trying to get a simpler framework to do business is a massive step in the right direction.
But what teeth will he have? How does he do that? So he rings up a company and says, look, you haven't paid Julie Deane for 6 months. I really think it's time. What if they say, do you know what, we haven't got the money this month?
Well,
what can he do?
I think, well, I mean, it doesn't stop there being other routes that can be pursued subsequently, but I don't think we need to underestimate the value of that threat of being scrutinised and being seen in the community as a poor relation of small businesses and somebody you wouldn't do business with. So I think that is quite significant.
Difficult to get coverage of that. I mean, we hear this morning Scottish Power, I think, is in big trouble.
18 million fine by the
wrapped across the knuckles, huge fine. I mean, is there going to be anything like that? Because it's not a big story if Julie Deane hasn't been paid, £6,000.
Well, it wouldn't be proportionate, would it? What we want is to see changed behaviours, to see that actually small businesses are getting treated better because they fear the exposure of it. I think that will have a massive
But the exposure that I'm asking about, where does it get exposed?
Well, I mean, it will be that the Small Business Commissioner will have the right to name and shame those individuals who are not doing that. And I think there are many ways that you can amplify and make sure that individuals are, very aware of the implications of not paying properly. Okay. And I think that will change behaviour.
Doug Henderson, what do you think of what you're hearing?
I think the proof of the pudding's in the eating. I mean, I'm in favour of public service, but I'm not in favour of public servants who don't add value. I think that's a waste of society's wealth and taxpayers' income. And so I think it very much depends on what changes the Commissioner is able to bring about. And I don't know all the detail, but does he have significant investigative powers? Does he have any regulatory powers? Does he have any powers which allow him to arbitrate and make it awkward for people not to accept the arbitration decision? A bit like ACAS in dealing with their conciliatory service in dealing with industrial arguments that employers and employed have. And if it has that kind of teeth, then it's something which I think, building on the Australian model, is desirable. But if it's just the creation of another public servant as a public relations exercise for everybody involved, then I don't think it adds value. And
Julie,
the judgment will be in what it actually is and how it performs.
What do you believe you're going to get from this Small Business Commissioner?
I don't think I want one.
I
don't think I want one, because government isn't where I look for my business advice.
It's not advice, though, is it? He's going to help.
I know
you
he's got some
action
teeth,
late
but
payment.
that's not. If somebody's not paying for me, I think that the private sector can do some brilliant things, and that's what we've called for some of the big law firms to do some decent stuff, like put out some manufacturing agreements, some NDAs, some supplier agreements that mean that we're properly set up and properly protected. Instead of thinking somebody's late in paying me, I'll phone a Small Business Commissioner.
What's anybody think? I mean, do you? Yes, there's a point here. Do you want a Small Business Commissioner? Do you think that he or she can help?
Yeah, I think the issue is obviously the whole thing of berating somebody for paying late in the first place. I think that will help people and give people the reassurance that they have some extra support. But But I think one of the biggest issues is educating both clients and freelancers on how to deal with these issues in the first place. And, you know, making sure that small business owners and freelancers, they put terms in place, they put payment terms, they make it not just have like a loose contract where, you know, oh, you're meant to pay in 14 days. And if you don't, well, that's, you know, poor me. But and equally educating the clients that, you know, they're dealing with a business person as much as anything else, so they need to respect that. And I think that's where campaigns like Fee Not Free are really trying to, you know, bring awareness about how those relationships could be improved.
I'm not entirely sure exactly where you stand. Do you actually believe the Small Business Commissioner is a good thing?
Yeah, but I don't think that in itself is enough to solve the issue at hand.
Okay. Anybody else from the floor before I ask? Yes, just pass the microphone along to the end of the row there. Thanks.
Jane Tully from Business Debtline. We help self-employed who are in financial difficulty and in debt. So we really see people who are at the sharp end. And one of the key reasons why people contact us is because of the late payments issue. And often they're already in financial difficulty, but this is exacerbating their problem. We feel that, you know, anything that highlights it as a concern for businesses is something that's going to be broadly welcomed within the system, whether or not for, you know, the clients and the people that we're dealing with who are, you know, really struggling with problems, are they going to pick up the phone and call the Small Business Commissioner themselves? I'm not sure, but if it helps to raise the policy profile of it and influence legislation in different places, then it's welcome.
I have to say, Julie, it has been a recurrent theme in year upon year for IPSE. The late payment issue is the biggest bugbear, I think, that they talk about.
I mean, I think it was as of July last year, nearly £27 billion worth of late payments are still waiting for small businesses. It is a critical issue. I agree with what Doug said. We don't want some, you know, bureaucracy that doesn't achieve anything. But I think if you listen to small businesses, you know, they don't want, to Julie's point, they don't want an intrusive part of government getting involved in their affairs. I mean, most small businesses, you know, want to have, you know, recourse to some assistance and some advice. But actually, as the gentleman who asked the question, you know, the arbitration process is a very sophisticated way where two companies, typically in the building sector, can resolve, you know, difficult disputes. And you know, that's another avenue. There are other avenues out there, and the regulators and ombudsmen and so on. So we don't want to have a duplication and a bureaucracy. We want an effective call to actually challenge and have the threat of exposure. And let's see where that 26.8 billion late payments figure goes over the next 5 years, and maybe that's the way we can see if it's working.
As Doug says, the proof would be in the pudding. Let's just take 5 minutes to talk about mortgages and pensions, because, you know, freelancers are definitely at a disadvantage as far as getting mortgages are concerned. As we know, you can have a feast year and a famine year, and you can't justify, the mortgage provider doesn't like us, essentially. And we need more understanding, greater flexibility. 61% of members, when IPSE did a poll, think mortgage advisors don't understand them. And IPSE has been asking for free, impartial advice on mortgages for the self-employed. And they want mortgage providers to be trained, to be aware that there are these kinds of different circumstances for people. It's got to be a good thing, hasn't it, Hannah?
Absolutely. And you know, I know just from, you know, personal family experience of, you know, family member trying to get access to finance for their business, trying to get a mortgage, you know, 2 years worth of accounts at least before you can get a mortgage. Mortgage advisors not having the information available to them to really understand the nature of it was a photography business. You know, a huge challenge for small businesses. And I think we need to, and particularly for freelancers, I've been a freelancer myself in the media and in the oil industry. And when you're trying to navigate your way through lots, you know, quite a complicated tax system and financial structures, advisors really, it is about PR, and it is about how we promote the work. And again, that whole culture of seeing freelancers and people who are self-employed as absolutely key to the economy, and people who are just, you know, who are just as successful as folk who are working 30 years in an individual company. So we have
But how
to
do you
provide
achieve
those
that?
support.
Julie, I mean, do you have an idea how you achieve that kind of impartial advice and that understanding from mortgage providers?
I think this is where the private sector and the big banks have really got to take a lead, you know, and they've got to, because it's such a massive opportunity for the one that's brave enough to say, okay, this is how we did it in the past, but now we're going to look at a more flexible way of doing it. And I know that HMRC, when they're trying to digitise so many of the records, you know, some of those things are going to help having tax returns more accessible, and then you can see more of that.
Yes.
But I think that the private sector has really got to step up. This is an opportunity.
Doug, do you want to make a
Julie's
comment?
she's absolutely right. I think, I mean, IPSE will be able to tell members that the big banks, the big clearing banks, are very conservative organisations, especially since 2007. And they don't want to make any changes to their systems unless they're forced to do it, either by the market or by a regulator. And the opportunity is there for other banks which are more innovative that we see in some of the high streets now, especially in London. And there is an opportunity for other banks to recognise that the culture's changed. The nature of the workforce is changed. People are self-employed. You can't have years and years of accounts before you can make a judgment on whether somebody should get a mortgage. So they need to be more innovative. And more people need to join IPSE and get the advice from them on how to do that.
Can I just quickly come in there? I've been, for various reasons with family things, gone through 3 mortgage applications in the last 6 months, 2 with traditional providers and 1 with...
You mean they won't have you?
Well, no, for family, supporting family members. One of them was much more flexible. Handelsbanken was able to actually execute and make a decision locally. My brief assessment of it is that after the crash, high multiples, people borrowing too much, that's a different issue, the level of risk and so on. What we're talking about here is actually having a reasonable level of regulation around self-certification of income levels. Because for many self-employed, there'll be a trajectory of growth, there'll be a limited history, and you know, there is a degree of risk. Of course there's a degree of risk. But I think we're in danger of saying there's one size fits all, everyone must present their income in the same way, with the same level of assurance, and that is not realistic. And it seems to me we've got to get the balance right between, you know, outlawing, you know, 6-7 times mortgages, which is not permissible at the moment, but also recognising that 3 in 20 people are self-employed and they'll have a different profile.
What about on pensions? I mean, IPSE again argues that the self-employed need different rules because they can't always afford to pay into a pension, but then maybe they can because they have a feast year and they pay a large sum into it, but then they might hit some famine. I think what IPSE believes should happen is that, especially for the self-employed, they should be able to withdraw some of those pension savings going back just a couple of years if they suddenly hit the fan. Do you think that could be possible?
Well, I think we're going through a massive change in the pensions industry and the pensions in this country. We've got auto-enrolment, which is now beginning to take effect for employed people. We've got the great flexibility at the other end. But I don't think we've got a response from government that addresses, as you say, the challenge of the self-employed. So, I mean, it's certainly a topic that I would be keen to look at on the select committee, because we've looked at auto-enrolment, we looked at the issues around flexibility, we're looking at the fair treatment issues. So I think there does need to be something done here, because where is the understanding of that profile of income and the flexibility there, and the tax incentives that match what other people enjoy?
Julie?
In the review, it was the people responding were very, very vocal. Almost 1,000 people directly responding to the survey, compared with 97 for the Small Business Commissioner. But and they were very, very clear that they did not want auto-enrolment for self-employed people.
They didn't.
No, I wasn't saying that. I was just saying that is a change that exists.
No, but it is a change that exists. But
they
were very, very concerned about somehow that they're frightened that they will lose their flexibility to support their business if their business should need it at some time. It's the flexibility.
So they don't want to put the money in a pension, they want to keep it in a fairly accessible so that they can...
It can be a pension, but it needs to have some kind of ability to draw out and put back without some enormous penalty.
But if you've had, a tax allowance because you put the money in a pension, you've got to pay that tax to get it out.
But in the same way as like with ISAs, it just has to be looked at.
But just quickly on that, the danger is lifetime ISAs, which the government brought in as a savings vehicle, versus pensions. If you actually project forward and look at what the ABI projects forward, without the additional tax benefits of the pension, the actual outcome 20, 30 years is far less favourable in terms of a pot of money. So we've got to make sure that whatever solution we come up with, yes, has the flexibility, but actually delivers the lump that you can actually draw down on.
And I think that the
properly.
rigidity of the current system is leading to enormous problems like BHS is seeing.
Well,
But I think there's an issue. There's
a bit of a leap from that to
but there's
NHS.
just as culture changes, there is an issue for society here, because we basically said everyone must have a second pension to build on the
State pension.
The state. I mustn't call it the old age pension.
State.
The state pension.
Please don't.
Indeed.
Senior citizens.
So that's a kind of principle that there's kind of quite cross-party support on
Yeah.
that. And the issue is about how can we do that most effectively. And the second issue is it compulsory? Now, the new state scheme, second pension, isn't compulsory in some circumstances. You can pull out of it, and you then, of course, lose the employer's contribution, which, it's a bit nonsensical. But that's by the way. So it raises a question of how do you deal with the self-employed? Because they're going to come to an age, like everybody else, when they're going to be dependent on the state pension, and that's it, or more. And should it be compulsory? Should there be tax incentives to contribute? Should you be able to take in and out? Because in other pension schemes you can take in and out now. You can cash in your pension when is it 55 or 60 now?
Yeah.
55 or 60.
And you can buy yourself a Lamborghini.
And you can then go and buy something else
Not
that
many
has an
people
asset.
have, actually, Sue.
Yeah, but you
Not a
can.
lot.
But that buyout could then have an asset value with interest, which could provide a pension. So it's a huge issue. This.
A bit worried about
Yeah,
time, but Hannah, you mentioned maternity benefits, I think, earlier on. And I mean, again, the self-employed are at a disadvantage because I know that employed women get the first 6 weeks at 90% of what they were being paid of their salary. I'm afraid self-employed people just get the basic monies that,
I mean, just two brief examples. My last job in the oil and gas sector, I had a member of staff who was on maternity leave when I first started my job, and I was told when she was returning to work that if she didn't come back within 9 months, she wasn't entitled to her job back. She just had to get any job in the company. So, incredible that we're still in that position that can happen. But similarly, in my own family, someone who has chosen to go into full-time self-employment because she couldn't get the flexibility. I think we have to look at the structures in our society, not just for women, but also for men. If we're talking about equality, this is about men and women, heterosexual couples, gay couples, whoever they are, whether they're having, adopting, being able to have the flexibility to have families and to get proper support when they're having their children, however they have their children. Otherwise, we are, in grave danger of, as someone described it to me recently at an event, we have a society that is now shaped like a coffin, because we have people at that section who are becoming elderly, and people at my age, in their early 30s, particularly in cities like London, who cannot afford to have a family and cannot afford, particularly women, to give up their job for any period of time, or if they are self-employed or freelancers, because there just is not the support there.
John Glen, IPSE believes that maternity pay should be funded by government for the self-employed, that there is this 6-week unfairness, actually, and that government ought to step in again to encourage, to change the culture, to put self-employed people on the playing field that's level.
Well, I mean, I think that, it's something that the government is looking at very seriously. I mean, I'm very instinctively supportive of it, because I think that, you do need to have you treat people equally, and just because people have a different, mode of employment doesn't mean to say they shouldn't be entitled to the same level of support. And I think if we want to be fair and honestly value the massive contribution that self-employed make to the economy, then this is something that we need to look at very carefully. But I'm not the minister, Sue, sadly.
This is being
I know.
recorded.
Well, I mean,
back.
but unfortunately, when you're a PPS, you are in a very strange position, because you don't make decisions.
But you have a pretty direct line.
I do. I shall be going to biz straight away after here. So
that's what we want to hear. Matt Searle, where is Matt Searle? Is he here? Can we have a microphone for Matt, please? Yes, you're under a bit of pressure here, John.
That's fine.
Hi, I'm a freelance IT consultant, and for the past 5 years I've been lucky enough to work from home exclusively. But I grew up in a rural village in Yorkshire, which still has very little or no mobile signal and pretty poor internet speeds, to the extent that if I go to my parents, I can't work from there. What can the government do to improve broadband speeds in rural areas?
Well, you know, this is the top issue for me too, and I'm sure for many of us in our constituencies. Look, the government's efforts on mobile infrastructure project, MIP, you know, by the Minister's own admission, were, you know, very, very disappointing. What they've done in terms of superfast broadband, you know, it has been positive. It's had a massive impact. But the issue is, how are you going to get it to happen for the last 10%? It seems to me technology is changing. There are a whole variety of options that need to be created. I would observe that it's the strongest sort of pressure coming from, you know, backbench colleagues on the government at the moment. And I'm hopeful that we'll see something in the Queen's speech, because what it seems to me is that you can roll out, get to the 92, 95% pretty well, but that's no good if you're in the village or in the hamlet that's away from that latest phase of development. So we need to find community solutions as well, where parishes are prepared to do their bit, and we also will need to go down to the individual level. Hopefully, and as I see it when I've gone through casework over the last 6 years, you know, there have been options to go to business providers of Vodafone, for example, who've been really helpful to try and get some solutions for people living in rural areas. But it will need a lot of forensic work. Well, they were for me. But what I would say is, you know, there needs to be a recognition that there needs to be a flexible set of options. The government cannot start rolling this out from Whitehall centrally. What they can do, though, is make sure that the menu's the right one for every area.
Doug, furious shaking of the head.
This is not a party political argument. I'm humming with John on this. This is from my experience. Vodafone and other companies, in my view, let the public down. And the opinion, the surveys show that. You know, if there's, I some of the time live in Anstruther and Fife on the coast near St Andrews, and I can't get my mobile phone to work. And people phone me and it just doesn't work. And I find that's replicated throughout the whole of the East Coast. Newcastle, Gateshead, there's areas down there, and Scarborough, and right down there. And it's so obvious to everyone who's ever there that this is happening, and nothing seems to be done about it. And when I phone up Vodafone, well, I don't really ask my secretary to do it, but and then it takes about an hour to authorise her to actually make all the calls to try and fix it. And you just get messed about, basically. And I think it would be a very popular political position for someone to stand up and say, I'm going to sort these people out and make sure that we get a good
So the
service.
mobile infrastructure project was an attempt to do that. It basically said, well, there are non-spots where and it didn't work. No. So I agree with you. And Ed Vasey says he's working on it.
And the mobile now is more important.
We need to be tough on those companies. So there's a couple of things. You know, company at the moment trying to take over O2, and I know that the Consumer and Markets Authority are working hard to stop that from happening. We cannot end up in the position that we used to be, where BT were the only company that could give you a landline and you waited 3 months for a landline. I mean, that's just ridiculous in a modern society. I would say, you know, in Scotland, the SNP have committed to 100% broadband across Scotland. It is an ambitious target, but it is one that we are committed to delivering because it is transformative for rural communities. Yeah, no? It's in black and white, Doug. It's in our manifesto. You can read it. I think we need to be tough on these companies, and we had an opportunity in the Enterprise Bill, Johnny, and I think you know this, that, you know, your party did not support the amendment that was proposed to mean that if companies got the contracts to install in specific areas, that they had to deliver a certain level of service and megabits, but you know, and that was an opportunity missed in my view. We have to be tough on this because businesses are suffering in rural areas.
Received, understood. Let's hope it happens. Femi Ogunbi, you here? Yes, here we are. Can we have a microphone? Yeah, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Femi Ogunbi from the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. In your view, how important are the self-employed to the successful delivery of the government's ambitious infrastructure projects such as Crossrail, HS2 and the Thames Tideway Tunnel, etc.?
Who'd like to answer that? Hannah, how important are the self-employed?
Absolutely key. And I think we need to be looking at, in terms of contracts, and we're delivering, when contracts are being given, what percentage of self-employed and freelancers are given the opportunity to take part in those contracts, because I think all too often, it's major, large companies. I would certainly like to see more smaller companies getting the opportunity to collaborate and to work together to bid for contracts, because I think it would be very
Julie?
Yeah, I completely agree, because that was another major point that came out during the view, was the whole issue of procurement, government procurement, public services. This is an ideal example, because this is an area that really hits the self-employed. It gives a massive opportunity to contractors, to freelancers, all those people in the building trade. But there isn't clarity over how do we hear about these opportunities and how do we apply, and can that process be simplified at all?
Yes.
So that was another clear message.
John, do you want to comment on this?
Well, I agree with what the panellists have said. It seems to me this is an opportunity for the government to, embrace the new provision out there in terms of self-employed people who can make a massive contribution. Of course, it's about also seeing that these people who are subcontractors often to bigger primes are treated properly, and to actually lead by example for the rest of the economy. But it is tricky, obviously, with some specialist areas in terms of having the right skills. I know in the defence industry there's been massive progress to get SMEs more involved. I see that in my own constituency. But absolutely. Whether targets is the right thing arbitrarily, I'm not so sure.
There are problems in this, though. I mean, in the real world, away from the theoretical world, if it's very difficult to group a number of small companies together. Syndicates of individuals can group together sometimes to bid for a contract, but small companies together compete with each other. And it's very difficult to prepare a joint tender unless they're all providing a different skill and they don't compete in another marketplace on the same area.
If the contract is written properly.
Becomes very difficult to get them to get together. That's my experience in some of the things I'm involved in now. That it's not a straightforward one.
Quick
difficult.
I just want to make a quick point on cash retentions, and that's something that has been raised with us as a party, and I know that there's concern across political parties in terms of particularly construction industry. So when companies are being held over a barrel and going out of business, I think it's something that we absolutely have to address. In Scotland, we have looked at project bank accounts, so similar to for rental deposits. That the government has an opportunity to be transformative in this area and hold those deposits and use the interest for good causes, rather than seeing companies, small and medium companies, going out of business because their cash retention is being held by larger companies.
It's a fair point.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask for Adam Waters. Adam Waters, where are you? Here he is.
Hi there, my name is Adam. I'm from the policy team here at IPSE. My question to the panel is, do they think the tax breaks for the North Sea oil and gas industry announced in the budget go far enough in supporting the self-employed in that sector?
So what did he do? He effectively abolished current petroleum revenue, didn't he? And he said this will level the playing field, I think, giving opportunities for the development of the new as against the old. And then the supplementary charge on the profits of oil companies is being cut from 20% to 10%. Good idea, Hannah.
Yeah, a bit late, I would say. Maybe a year too late.
Don't be churlish, you've got it now.
No, I think, it's a positive step. We called for it, it happened. However, over 60,000 people had lost their jobs by then. Now, at the point where I was working in the oil and gas sector, it would be fair to say there were probably too many contractors in the industry. We were at a stage where there had been a skills shortage for quite a significant amount of time. Contractors were demanding significantly more money than was fair, and you couldn't afford to get a drilling rig because the rates were so high. Cedia and Wood had already identified a lot of these problems, and the industry was becoming unsustainable, over $100 a barrel. I think the industry's done an incredible job. What we need is more support from government, and we have worked with the UK government constructively, and we've got a task force in Scotland and invested in redeployment and retraining. But there are still people out there who have lost their jobs, and we do not want to lose their skills because the industry is alive.
When you say more support, what do you want?
We want more support for retraining, for keeping people in those jobs, and also looking at the infrastructure in the North Sea and not decommissioning too early, because there is a real danger if we start decommissioning assets that it will have a knock-on domino effect.
Hannah, I'm not speaking as a politician here, I'm speaking as somebody in business. I mean, do you think it's right that the public should subsidise rich oil companies or companies which were rich? Because that's actually what you're saying.
No.
Now, if that's
No,
what
I'm
you're
talking about
saying, then be
subsidising
clear
the
about it.
skills and subsidising the people that have...
That's the same thing. Well, if it's to keep people in the oil industry, I mean, I've got lots of friends in the oil industry, and they work all over the world. Yeah. They don't just work in the North Sea. No. And they have to move in response to different economic conditions. And I think it's wrong for politicians to say they can save these 60,000 jobs. They can't. It's all dependent on the international oil price. And we have, Britain has a minimal influence in that. Scotland would have no influence in it whatsoever. And, you know, we have to face up to that. What's really required is to take these skills and transfer the skills into something else where there's a strong market, a strong economic place.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
I think government and Scottish enterprise could have a very positive role in that. But let's not kid people on that we're going to save 60,000 jobs in the North Sea. We're not.
John Glen.
Before I was a Member of Parliament, I've spent 13 years in consulting and worked at DICE for BP for a couple of years. And the sort of cyclical nature of the oil industry and the boom and bust sort of scenarios do present real challenges. I was delighted that the Oil and Gas UK welcomed the Chancellor's announcement. And it was the right thing to do. But I think there is a sensible point around how you actually retain the skills. But the oil companies themselves need to take responsibility
I completely agree with
because it's in their interest to have a spine of skills. And I think Doug's absolutely right. It's a question of working out where there's the transferability in the short term, because I suspect in 2 or 3 years' time, the oil price will be going up from 30 whatever dollars a barrel up to 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever. And there'll be a different pattern, and then there'll be, it's important that they actually continue to invest in those skills in good times and bad.
Had a lot of consensus on this platform this morning. Thank you very much for that. Julie, quick last word. We should give you the last word. I mean, you've done this employment review. Very good PR, I think, as Doug said. It's only going to be that, and it's going to gather dust on the shelf unless it gets implemented. John Glen has said he's listening. How optimistic are you that something will happen as a result of your review?
I'm really pleased that he said he's listening, and I'll be in touch really soon. We are keeping on pushing and pushing and pushing to get meetings and to get commitments. And I think we've got the help of IPSE. We've got so many people behind this that I don't think it is going to go away.
Brilliant. Okay, to end this session, we have an award ceremony. Stay there, all of you, if you would. We have 2 of Julie Deane's satchels to give away, and when you came in and were given your name badge and you signed in, and a copy of that name badge was put into the hat. Here is the hat, and I'm going to ask Julie to come over here if you would and choose a winner. We've got 1 male and 1 female, but if you're the opposite sex and you get one, you just have to give it to your partner or your mum or whatever it is.
I've already got a few. Yeah. Okay, so Chris Wilford.
Chris Wilford. Oh! He's one of our questioners from
and
the
luckily it's not bright red.
Yeah. Is he from the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators? Thank you for your question.
Yes.
And then for the little red one I've been waving around. So nice.
That was in Italian Vogue. It was.
Oh, I mean...
I can create a little hashtag for people here today for a discount.
Oh,
okay.
She's doing business, isn't
I am.
This is...
So this is... Oh, this is the other person that we spoke to, Femi, who asked the question before. So,
Femi,
red, and we will change it to a more appropriate colour if you want.
Red can also be masculine.
Sorry, you should be.
Yes. Oh, we can absolutely swap it if red's not your colour. She definitely will for present.
Well, there you are. You see, if you have the guts to ask a question, you get rewarded. Julie Deane, Hannah Bardell, John Glen, and Doug Henderson, thank you very much indeed for being our question time panel. Coffee and comfort break now. After the break, we'll be discussing Europe, to stay or to go. I'll be announcing the result of IPSE's poll on that issue. We'll also be hearing from Britain's first ever small business minister, Anna Soubry. So do come back. Coffee just out there. Back here at 10:30 if you would, please. Thank you.